Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce's Ukraine War Frontline update for the 6th of August 2023. A few caveats first. I haven't been paying as close attention to the mapping changes over the last few days as I would normally do because, as many of you know, I'm on holiday, all that, blah, blah, blah. I've relied a lot on Jerome, who's a great supporter of the channel, who has actually done all the mapping changes from both Andrew Perpetua's map and also Suryap Maps. So the blue line and the red line referring to, as I say, Andrew Perpetua, the pro-Ukrainian mapper, and the red line, Suryap Maps, a pro-Russian mapper. The white line is the 30th of May Russian defensive line. That's before the counter offensive started. So I have huge thanks to him for that. And my knowledge base isn't as wide as it should be. I'll try and get back up to speed by tomorrow and hopefully have time to do this tomorrow. But my mapping ones would be the least likely to be done on a daily basis due to extenuating circumstances, shall we say. Anyway, if we go and look at the Kupiansk to Svatova to Crimea front line, we have Kupiansk at the top here where the Russians are pressuring. There was some success a few days ago, possibly in the Sinkivka direction. I'm not referring to Institute for the Study of War either today. This is just going off some mapping changes and a few sources I've cobbled together. So, please don't take this as kind of gospel truth. There is also a pushing from the Russians in the Novosibirsk direction. Actually, there's something to be said about that. First of all, we have Suryap Maps saying the situation on the Luhansk front. A recent video footage from RIA Novosti, so that's a mainstream media outlet in Russia, shows Russian artillery targeting the remaining Ukrainian soldiers, as I say, in the village of Novosibirsk, and they give a coordinates here of the shelling of those Ukrainian troops. Novosibirsk is that small town or small village, really, on the outskirts. Or on the other side of the road, in the other side of the railway from Kuzmivka. It is on higher ground to Kuzmivka, and the Ukrainians have moved into Kuzmivka, taken part of that, and then been pushed back more recently. It's been a bit of a yo-yo place over time. As you can see here, we have Andrew Perpetua's map saying that is now completely contested in Novosibirsk. We have the Ukrainians being shelled in that northern part of Novosibirsk, and we have Suryap Maps saying that there are gains in Novosibirsk there, Russian gains throughout the whole of Novosibirsk. So if we look at the map, well, continue to say what he says, which was retaken by the Russian army after securing the northern and southern outskirts as a result of the latest attacks. During the last weeks, the town was located in the grey area, with the Ukrainian army trying to establish again a presence in the western hangars, but failing continuously. The capture of the neighbouring positions forced Ukrainian troops to retreat westwards in the last hours to better positions close to the border with the Kharkiv Oblast. And so, as you can see here, Suryap Maps has Novosibirsk fully under Russian control, but that isn't quite what is understood by Andrew Perpetua, although he does say it's completely contested. And then there are some sort of sneaky gains over here from Suryap Maps. So JR was telling me that Suryap Maps has done releases stuff like this, these kind of tweets with individual images showing Russian advances, but there's a few other changes that doesn't necessarily shout about that. But when you look at the maps, there are changes. Here is one of them. So there is a bit of a change for the Ukrainians in their favor just to the south, where previously the Russians had some success to the south and to the north of Kuzmivka. Perhaps some gains here on the way to Pidkuichansk. I remember sometime back when Pidkuichansk was supposedly under Ukrainian control, so things do change over time, right? And so few changes in Ukrainian favor there, but nothing sort of discussed by Suryap Maps. And then we come to what's going on here. Suryap Maps actually has some fairly lengthy commentary on what's taking place there. Here, Global War Monitor says that Ukraine advanced in the Luhansk Oblast, eliminating all Russian gains. So that's a fairly big claim there. Since July, in the Crimea Svatova area, 1.8 square kilometers have been added to the liberated status. Now, this is quite significant because this was a position that the Ukrainians were pushed back quite a lot to the tune of perhaps 6 kilometers in certain places. The Russians had gained a foothold in several places across the Zherebets River that comes north to south down here, sort of parallel with the Krasna River, which is the other side of the P66 highway, coming down from Svatova to Crimea, and kind of parallel to the larger Oskil River. There was talk about the Russians trying a larger sort of counter attack towards Borova here to try and get up to the Oskil River. I was saying that that's surely beyond their capabilities, beyond their capacity, really. They don't have the troops to be able to do that. And it seems that they have been pushed back in this area. So Suryap Maps does a pretty large discussion alongside this map here, where you can see that the Ukrainians are pushing back. The Russians are still sort of pushing in all of these different areas along the entire sort of Kupiansk to Svatova front line. But it's this area here where we're talking about now. Let's just read to you what Suryap Map says. During the first few days, there have been reports, there have been reports that the Ukrainian army retook the last captured Russian positions west of the Zherebets River. The truth is that the front has remained unchanged. So Suryap Maps is contesting what we've just heard from Global War Monitor, I think it was, has remained unchanged during the last days as Russian troops managed to stop the new Ukrainian reinforcements. In parallel, the Russian army has resumed attacks on various axes of the northeastern front, making small advances. In the social networks, the lie of the, quote, Russian offensive of 100,000 troops continues. Nothing could be further from the truth, as it has been said on numerous occasions. This is that claim that there's 100,000 troops up in this area, and people mistook that. I think it was just a misinterpretation. Like there are 100,000 Russian troops in this whole area. That I think is probably not up for debate. But those troops are all in the back area. There are quite a few training camps in Luhansk. Luhansk is one of the main areas for the Russian army for training. So you have lots of those troops. You have logistics. Some large logistics routes sort of come through Starobilsk. Railway and up from Troitska up here, so on and so forth. You'll have command and control, all sorts. So 100,000 isn't 100,000 people lined up on the front lines with muskets in hand, ready to charge, right? So, however, there were claims that some 11,000 troops were maybe drafted in, extra troops to the frontline activities, and that's possibly partly why the Russians were able to make some advances in a number of places, and that's arguably still the case. So they do have the ability, they do have troops there, and their force concentration is fairly decent in that northeast, and the force quality is also, well, it's always fairly patchwork up and down the Russian lines, but they do have some half decent troops up there as well. Anyway, to continue, nothing could be further from the truth. As it's been said on numerous occasions, the Russian army is on the defensive, and a Russian offensive of great caliber is not foreseen in the coming months. What we are observing these days is a series of attacks aimed at diverting Ukrainian troops from the southern and eastern front, where they were making a series of territorial gains in recent weeks. As a consequence, the Ukrainian army has reduced its offensive actions while waiting for new reserve troops from the centre and west of the country. I'm not sure that's totally true. I think that they've stopped going on the full frontal attacks because they're doing attritional ranged activity rather than attacking with mechanized battalions and infantry and whatnot. On the other hand, the possible response of the Ukrainian troops is an increase of activities on the border between Kharkiv and Belgorod in order to divert Russian resources towards a border in view of the possibility of further incursions into their territory. I haven't heard too much about that, to be honest. So, not sure where Suryap's going fully with that, but it is definitely the case that Ukrainians have stopped Russian advances in the main in that area. Whether they've pushed them fully back, as is claimed here by Global War Monitor, to their original positions is open to debate. Right, as we come further down, I'm sure there's still activity going on in Crimea and the Serebryansky Forest. Again, I would have to check other sources. I am a little bit behind, sorry. But it seems that the Russians have possibly continued gains or having rejigs of the mapping. Not quite sure, says JR here, but this is Suryap Maps showing that the Russians are creeping towards Bilohorivka, as I said last time I spoke to you. But that's not yet agreed upon by Andrew Perpetua. There's quite a sizable difference between the two mappers in that area. And then as we come further down, although there will be activity, nothing of particular change on the maps that I use. I'm just going to have a look at Poulet-Volant. So Poulet-Volant is a mapper that uses Andrew Perpetua quite widely for their mapping, and really I think it's all next point of port of call is Bakhmut and to the south of Bakhmut, so that's where we will go. Again, not a lot of talk about the north of Bakhmut. There is some claims that the Ukrainians have made some sort of advances or are pushing in towards Yahidne. We'll come on to that in a second. Rather than trying to go up into Bakivka where they were, they seem to have met a lot of resistance there. The Russians are really pushing back in Bakivka. Because if they get into Bakivka and successfully get to the road, of course, that cuts all the Russian troops off from here. So actually, that you can see why the Russians are wanting to stop that from happening. So fierce fighting over Bakivka over the last few weeks. We'll go now to. I do want to keep Poulet-Volant's map open there, so we'll go on to look at some of the other sources. So this is no reports quoting Major Maxim Zhorin confirming the stories. So there's a Ukrainian source saying regarding Klishchivka, I believe that the enemy no longer has a chance in this settlement. At least half of Klishchivka is fully controlled by our forces. The second half we have fire control. So as we come to the south of Bakhmut, it is, still talk about Klishchivka. No mapping changes, but half of Klishchivka under Ukrainian control. And that's been said by a number of different sources. I don't, and I said this last time I did a mapping update, I don't think Suryap Maps is at all correct with Russian control over Klishchivka, as if the Ukrainians are still back here. You'd have grey zone and back here behind these entrenchments at the top of the hill overlooking Klishchivka. That's never the case. There's so much video footage of Russians being hit along the railway line here, particularly to the north of Klishchivka, that there's just no way they can maintain that claim. As you see from this is mainly Andrew Perpetua, but this is Poulet-Volant talking about how the Russians are pushing back. They are trying to hold on to Klishchivka, Andriivka, and Kurdyamivka. So there's fierce fighting over all of these settlements. Here we have Peter Clifford saying that going back to north of Bakhmut, talking about Yahidne, as I was saying, around the Rose Alley area, possible gains there, as according to his source, which is, just to remind you, that's this area, Rose Alley to the north. This is the Yahidne area, south of Yahidne. So that's where the Ukrainians might have had some joy, but not reflected in either of the mappers I use. But yeah, other than that, he then goes on to mention again the same sort of claims that 50% of Klishchivka is under control of the Ukrainians, so the rest is contested, and that Kurdyamivka is contested. So that is Kurdyamivka to the south, where the Ukrainians are on the edges, fighting on the edges of Kurdyamivka, and the Russians are being pushed back slowly but surely. Right, sorry, my fingers, I really should be using the mouse rather than my trackpad, my touchpad, because hey, when you got MS and can't feel your fingers, anything can happen. Right, okay, coming out of Bakhmut, we come down to Avdiivka, where there is a bit of talk about Krasnohorivka. Now, as you know, there are several Krasnohorivkas. In fact, as you know, there are several of every town name in Ukraine next to other versions of that town name. So Krasnohorivka to the north of Avdiivka, and Krasnohorivka to the south of Avdiivka. There you go. So in the Vesely area, the Kamyanka area, it looks like there are Ukrainian gains here, as according to Andrew Perpetua, and as according to Deep State Map here, he's usefully done that in yellow, so that's really cool. So that is significant because the Ukrainians were being pushed back from there. So there's obviously some sort of to and fro there as they are fighting over territory into the north of Avdiivka. And then as we come to the south of Avdiivka, around Opitny, there are Russian gains as according to Suryap Maps, and then Ukrainian gains, or possibly a rejig according to Deep State Maps, at the sides of that that gap just north of Spartak there. So activity, Avdiivka is one of those places where there's just consistent activity all the time in so very many places around there. And then I don't know if you remember, a few weeks ago we were talking a lot about a mine that was attacked towards Krasnohorivka. Well, we're going to be speaking about that again because that is, I was going to say our next port of call, but actually there were Ukrainian gains as according to Suryap Maps. But again, one of those cheeky gains where they haven't really talked about it. They haven't put like a tweet picture, but that is, I think, just starting to agree more with what both Andrew Perpetua and Deep State Maps had previously said, which is around Novelsky, a small village to the south of Pervomaisky that stops Pervomaisky being flanked, which itself stops Avdiivka being further flanked. So yeah, it's all kind of potential dominoes, isn't it? So it's important that Ukrainians keep holding Novelsky, and they've pushed the Russians back from there, and that is now being admitted, I think, by Suryap Maps. That's probably why they haven't released a kind of separate tweet, which is just kind of like, yeah, okay, we should have said that 2 or 3, 4 days ago, and now we're sort of catching up. But they do say something about here. So if you remember, the Russians attacked towards this mine, occupied the mine for a short while, and then were absolutely bombarded. They lost a load of equipment getting to the mine, and then lost a load of troops at the mine, and then loads of troops walking away from the mine as they were hit with cluster munition. It was just basically, it seemed a pretty disastrous attack. But since then, Surat Maps hasn't changed their position in claiming that the Russians control the mine area. I'm not sure that's at all true. And in fact, Andrew Perpetua, I trust a lot more here. But it seems like they have attacked it from another direction along what looks like a railway line to the east of Krasnohorivka itself. If we go to Suryap Maps here, they say that the Russian army has restarted advances towards Krasnohorivka and not only retook the previously captured position by the Ukrainian army, but now also positions located in the 2014 defense line. So that is to say that this, for them, the orange line there looks like the 2014 defense line, and that the Russians have taken some territory beyond that. You can see that defense line as a purple line here, which is overwritten by some of the other colors, but that purple line is a 2014 line. We did have some successes for the Ukrainians taking some land off the Russians behind that 2014 defense line over the last month. But this is the same area where Suryap Maps is now claiming the Russians have taken back that territory and taken more too. No report says Russian troops attacking a Ukrainian trench line near Krasnohorivka. In recent weeks, the Ukrainians managed to gain control over more area close to Petrovsky district of Donetsk. So this is kind of going the other way from no reports, saying that Ukrainians have made gains around here. But this is a Ukrainian trench that is being attacked by the Russians, and that is going to be the same encounter, right? No reports. I mean, it's interesting that both of them are reporting this. And they're both disagreeing with what each other's are saying. Well, at least no reports doesn't really talk about any successes for either side, other than the Ukrainians have had success there over recent weeks, and Suryap Maps saying that the Russians have taken that trench. No reports. Suryap Maps could be right here. No reports is saying that, yeah, they exactly like I've said, the Ukrainians have had success over there. They are now getting bombed in that trench. What is the outcome of getting attacked in that trench? How do we have evidence that the Russians have taken that trench line? I don't know, but Suryap Maps seems to be confident that the Russians have taken control there. I would just sit on the fence myself. They may be in control of that area, or they may not. Of course, so therefore, my conclusions are meaningless. Right, as we move to the south, past Mariinka, where there's no doubt activity taking place, and on towards, interestingly, to it's the southern Donetsk front line. It's to the southwest of Pavlivka and Vuhledar, where the Ukrainians have had some success pushing the Russians back to Mikilska and hammering them in this area with first-person view drones and whatnot. So there's a lot of success for a lot of footage coming out from that area. We go to the west. The Ukrainians did have some success north of Shevchenko, I seem to remember, and indeed, there were claims that Novomayorska and up here Novodonetsk were liberated by the Ukrainians. However, it appears that actually they might have lost some ground around there. We have Poulet-Volon's map, which I've now got rid of, having a bit of a red area to represent exactly what is shown here. So Poulet Vallon and Andrew, as I said already several times, relies quite a lot on Andrew Perpetua. So we'll just look at that again. As you can see, those red pins represent this kind of potential gain. I don't know whether that's gain or rejig, but I'd have to look at what Andrew Perpetua says about this. But certainly, the lines are moved in favour of the Russians there. Then, as we come further to the west, we have some gains, as according to Andrew Perpetua, in the Staromayorsky area, and this is eating finally into this large, relatively large bridgehead that the Russians have kept hold of. I don't know whether bridgehead's the right name for that, considering they're on a defensive. But the Ukrainians have kind of failed to take that area northeast of Pryutne, between Pryutne and Staromayorsky. But now, according to Andrew Perpetua, they have had some success in pushing the Russians back, and this is higher ground here that looks over Urizhny and Staromayorsky there. So Staromayorsky is that settlement. So if we look at the height around here, that's 170 meters there. Down into where the river comes in, that's 115 meters. And if we come over here, 120 meters, so on and so forth. So it is a little high ground over there. That is useful, but obviously that makes it potentially slightly harder for the Ukrainians to take off the Russians. But success there is good news for the Ukrainians. There's absolutely no doubt about that. It's sort of bite and hold, isn't it? And if we come on to what actually Radu Hospital says of the area, Veliko Novosilka, Mariupol, Ukrainians continue its counteroffensive through Urizhny and south of Staromayorsky, but also west to Novodonetsk, another contested settlement. The Ukrainians have less than 8 kilometers to the only fortification line, part of the Suryap line in this area. Now, that's interesting because they're saying that this is contested, but actually Andrew Perpetua has some gains for the Russians there. So I don't quite know, but he's talking about 8 kilometers from here to the main, which is, pretty much right. So I was telling you before that the Surovikin line comes south of Staromilnivka, so that's the importance of Staromilnivka, because after that settlement, it is into the Surovikin line, that main defensive line, and after it's not like around Robotna where there are like 3 or 4 defensive lines. There's just this one major one there, and then it's sort of much easier all the way down to Mariupol. Sorry, so this is why this a particular vector of attack is, I think, an important one and could lead to some serious gains. But this area before the major trench line is just littered with trench lines itself, like just much smaller ones in the tree lines, dugouts, so on and so forth. So there are major trench lines around, but also every tree line is a trench line, arguably. Right, as we come to the west, we come towards Robotna. And we'll go back to Radu Hospital, who says in this area, the first line of defense in the Surovikin line has been breached. It follows the main line south of Robotna. Robotna is now contested settlement, no longer 100% in Russian hands. And I find that quite interesting. Don't have any other evidence that the Ukrainians are kind of in Robotna, or that the Russians have kind of removed themselves back from Robotna at all to make it a grey zone and contested. But that is a claim here from Radu Hosu. Of course, take it with a pinch of salt. We come on to what No Report says about this is that Robotna area south of Malatokmachka and Orikhiv here. He says more than... no, he doesn't. He says something else up here. He says Ukrainian forces are moving towards Verbova. Deputy Ministry of Defense Minister Hanna Malia has reported that Ukrainian forces breached the first line of defense, and footage appeared of Ukrainian units hitting Russia's first line of defense, the Surovikin line, with cluster ammunition and artillery. And footage of the Russian forces getting targeted near Verbove is provided by No Reports. He says Ukrainian affiliated channel Immaterium shares footage of Ukrainian artillery firing both regular and cluster shells at Russian positions west of Verbove. They are obviously getting closer. So if we come back a little bit, there's Verbove. and then it's moving down. They've breached this first part of the trench lines there, the major trench lines, and they could be moving down the trench lines towards Robotna, as well as moving south and contesting Robotna itself. The footage that I haven't shown you because I don't want to get into trouble, but this is the footage that has the Russians in their main trench line that sort of comes back round here from the area that the Ukrainians have taken, being the Russians being hammered by different artillery in that area. So it could be that the Ukrainians are making slow but steady advances in this area. It will have been, at the end of the day, fairly costly, though. They have lost a lot of equipment in the Robotna and the Novopokrovka area, where the Ukrainians are trying to make inroads to the south of there. So that is the situation around there. Not a great deal more to talk about. They are pushing apparently still towards Luhove in the Kamyanska area, but I haven't heard too much about that. Zerobianki, Piatichetki, no real change there as far as I can work out. It's being incredibly difficult for the Ukrainians to make further gains right there. Now, just before I leave you today, I was just looking at a few nuggets of news coming out that concern Crimea. There isn't too much to mention about the Kherson area, the Dnipro River Delta, other than that Andrew Perpetua has the Russian defensive line pushed back from the Konka River a little bit. Ukrainian controls, small strokes on both sides. So that's Ukrainian control into the grey zone, actually, I think, more where they are controlling more of these islands that were fully grey zone. But still, Andrew Perpetua has this, which other mappers don't. I know No Reports has this as total grey zone. So I'm interested to see, what the truth is about that. But yeah, what I wanted to talk to you about was Crimea. Now, there's news just in that the bridge from Kherson Oblast leading to the Arabat Spit has reportedly been hit with Storm Shadow missiles. There are also claims from Vladimir Rogov, a member of the military civilian administration in Zaporizhia, that the Chonhar Bridge southwest, somewhat west, is also hit. So the Chonhar Bridge has been hit previously, possibly hit again. And there's lots of talk about this. Additional footage of damage to the Henichesk Arabat Spit Bridge, marked with red on the map here. So that is there. This is more of a sandy road going all the way down the Spit, but it is a grand line of communication technically, and possibly fairly useful considering the Chonhar Bridge, or bridges, the railway bridge and the road bridge, keep getting hit and have been hit again by the looks of it. And it's only going to be a matter of time before Armyansk is hammered in the Perekop area as the only area that remains open for Russian traffic. So just see if there's potential strike on a bridge connection from Henichesk Arabat Spit, and then photos coming out published by the Russian appointed head of the Kherson region to show that there is damage to the Chonhar Bridge, but doesn't know whether that's new or old damage. But there are reports that Chonhar was hit again. And then this is the Henichesk bridge at the Arabat Spit. So, and I was saying to you only the other day that you can bet your bottom dollars these bridges will be hit in the Henichesk area, because it's just the natural next step there. So it's in that area, Chonhar, both the railway bridge and the road bridge. Now you've got the road bridge at Henichesk, and then it's really going to be a matter of time before this route is hit that goes up through Armyansk. And I don't know whether there are any bridges here on that road or the railway that goes up through there. But there's Armyansk. But you'd imagine there could be a moment where a bridge gets taken out somewhere along that road over the next few days, week or so. But the Ukrainians are really trying hard to hit the Russian logistics so that they just are unable to supply these forces in the south, because the railway that comes from the east goes through Volnovakha and is not functional. It's so close, the railway here, to the front line that it just is being routinely hammered to the point where I think it's not functional. So all the rail traffic actually comes across the Kerch and then through Chonhar. So they've not only taken out the Kerch Bridge as much as they can, but they've taken out these other points, as well as taking out the logistics hubs within Crimea, like Jankoy and some of these other places were Feodosia and so on and so forth. So they are hitting the logistics consistently and crippling the Russian ability to supply their troops in this whole southern region. Right, there you go. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. Really appreciate you supporting the channel. Hopefully this was of interest. Hopefully my laptop didn't freeze too much. I'm running it. I do my mapping normally on my more powerful laptop at home. So yeah, sorry if it froze at all, but there you go. Anyway, take care.